CeeLo killed this shit.
There are a few things I want to mention about Martini's shell design. First, the inside of the shell contains tiny glitter-like particles. Under different lighting conditions, it catches light and sparkles a bit, which looks surprisingly good. Second, the shell is rather thick. If you have smaller ears, there's a good chance this thing is going to feel a little challenging to wear. For the measurement, this time I ran into something completely unexpected. As you can see, there's a very obvious and very abnormal fluctuation in this region. It's not just the frequency response that's affected, even the phase response flips by roughly 180 degrees. Considering the driver configuration is 1 DD plus 4 BA and 1 bone conduction driver, my best guess is that the bone conduction driver is exciting the shell structure itself, causing the shell and nozzle to resonate together, which then creates some sort of coupling issue with the 528's ear. The reason I suspect this is because bone conduction driver work quite differently from conventional driver. A normal dynamic driver radiates some into the ear. Bone conduction driver, on the other hand, injects mechanical energy directly into the shell. So if the sound coming from the DD and the BA driver through the ear and the vibration coming from the bone conduction driver through the shell, they arrive at the coupler at the same time, you normally end up with partial cancellation, which could explain the weird oscillations we're seeing here. That said, I have to admit, this is one of the more interesting measurements I've encountered recently. So I'll leave in less detail this time. The bass has lowest gain out of the three. Overall, the balance is kinda like 2-5-3, so it doesn't put much emphasis on the low end. The lower mid transition region sits below the preference bounds. That means vocal chest resonance and instrument body will be reduced. In other words, the sound is likely to feel lighter and less full through the lower mids. Then you get a classic 3000 Hz peak, followed by a dip in the sibilance region to keep sharpness under control. And finally, a strong upper treble peak to emphasize ear, overtones, and that sense of openness. So, in summary, technically this should roughly translate into a sound that's clean, transparent, and slightly thin in the vocal. The impedance is very stable. Rated impedance is 10.6 ohm. The lowest point is around 8 ohm at 19.2 thousand Hz, and the highest point is around 19.4 ohm and 20,000 Hz. Overall, the curve is very steady, so you shouldn't be picky about source output impedance. As for the actual listening experience, I think the two defining traits of Martini are smoothness and balance. Plus, the overall presentation is so gentle and controlled. The edges of note have been rounded off quite deliberately. Treble sharpness is kept to a minimum, and only on very rare occasions do you notice a slight hint of roughness, kind of like the typical SE. Another aspect, the sense of balance comes through in almost every aspect of the tuning. The positioning of instrument, the size of image, and the distribution of bass, mids, and treble. Even the overall presentation itself, almost everything can be described as balance. Nothing feels exaggerated, nothing feels like it's trying to grab your attention. It's a very composed and well-proportioned sound. Anyway, let's start with the bass in detail. I think it honestly lives up to the Martini name very well. It feels like someone drank 100 martinis the night before and went straight into a full-blown hangover arc and woke up the next morning feeling like they have been punched in the face. Okay, here's the real explanation. The bass itself is actually fairly tight and quick. Transient response is very fast, so it doesn't generate a huge sense of bloom or warmth. On top of that, impact is decent. And there's a respectable amount of sub-bass information as well. The problem, at least to my ear, is that the transition between the mid-bass and the sub-bass isn't particularly convincing. The extension feels somewhat less cohesive. So as a result, some of the energy that would normally be distributed further down into the sub-bass ended up punched together in the same layer instead of spreading out in depths. The mid-range is sufficiently bright and transparent, which also remaining very smooth and effortless. Both the vocal distance and image size sits right in that balanced middle ground as I mentioned before. The overall presentation feels light and airy. Vocal carry a slight sense of airiness to them. That said, this sense of airiness comes within a trade-off. In my, again, honest opinion, a lot of it is achieved by reducing the density in the lower mids and lower mid transition region. As a result, it feels lighter and more airy, but at the same time, certain instruments and sometimes even the vocal themselves can sound a bit too thin. It's not thin enough to sound broken, but just light enough that some notes can come across as a little too delicate or insubstantial. But anyway, I think it really depends on whether you like a thinner imaging or the thicker one. Treble brightness sits in a very comfortable spot. It doesn't try to create the illusion or extreme extension by aggressively boosting the upper treble. It's the kind of tuning that doesn't require exceptional control but still maintaining a smooth and well-behaved top end. I'd say it's very similar to the T Pro SE. And also, some treble details are intentionally highlighted. Symbols, for example, they try to stand out a little more than usual. They carry slightly more brightness and presence, so occasionally you'll notice a bit of that sizzle I mentioned at the beginning. And last, the soundstage. The soundstage isn't particularly large. For the price range, I'd say it's about average. This isn't one of those IEM that try to impress you with that massive width or exaggerated soundstage. Instead, it focuses more on cohesion and overall presentation. The stage may not be huge, but everything feels connected and organized, which suits the Martini's smooth and balanced character quite well.